I think the element that makes Fort Collins great is the practicality of its people. One thing that has impressed me over the years is how, on average, our citizens are pretty sensible and practical. We have a nice combination of peoples whose background include agriculture, high-tech, higher education, but I think our blend of citizens has brought us an orientation toward problem solving and figuring out what works. We're not really we're not a community that's oriented toward scoring points so much as one that solves problems. Fort Collins, the community has changed enormously in the last 20 years, not the least of which is our natural resource protection and interest in incorporating high-value agriculture in some of our conversations. I think that's one of the very interesting trends that's occurring that was not at all part of the conversation back 20 years ago. There's been enormous population growth, but I enjoy the fact that we've been able to create pockets of livability throughout the community so that you're not too far distant from everyday conveniences, no matter where you live in Fort Collins. That, I think, is not by accident, and I know it's not by accident, and it has lent us a very impressive quality of life. A simple thing that's changed since I was mayor is access to electronic communication. When I was mayor, I had one of the very first cell phones that city officials were provided, and mine was about the size of a walkie-talkie in a suitcase. I had to switch the battery about every 6 hours. It was so heavy and big that, I mean, it just makes me laugh, but it did create the opportunity for me to be out in the community and at the same time be serving as mayor. My phone would ring and I'd pick it up and someone would say, "Is this the mayor's office?" And I'd say yes, and I'd be at the cheese department at Albertsons, you know. And now we think of that everywhere, that electronic communication, telecommunication is just everywhere. But when I was mayor, it wasn't true. We were just starting to have email, in fact, and it was quite controversial when some council members were emailing each other in sort of a fight, and I chose to make their email correspondence public because, electronic communication among and between elected officials is public. But that was a really big question. How public should the emails be of elected officials? So that shows how far we've come. The proudest moment that I recall as mayor of Fort Collins was the opportunity to represent the community in testimony before the Senate Natural Resources Committee, requesting designation of the Poudre River as a National Heritage Area. It was very important to me personally, but it also was an opportunity to talk with people at the national level about water in the West. The natural heritage areas throughout the country were primarily oriented toward industrial revolution sites. But the designation of the Poudre River as a National Heritage Area signaled the identification of water in the West and a river in the West as a working river that didn't necessarily spur industrial revolution in the manufacturing sector. So it was a huge honor for me to represent our city there, but also to press that point about water in the West. When I was the mayor of Fort Collins, we were just beginning as a community and country and actually a world to discuss homosexuality as a civil right. And we had the Human Relations Commission request that the civil rights protections for gays, lesbians, transgendered folks be added to our civil rights code. We were, as a city council, placed in the very early position of having to decide how to proceed with a request from the Human Relations Commission. I can't say that I personally handled the hearings well. That was a very emotional and really paradigm-shifting conversation. Of the 7 members of the City Council, I alone felt that the question of civil rights protection should never be put to a vote. I think civil rights protections are really a discussion that we should have through elected officials and courts, not a majority position, because minority rights are rarely advanced by majorities. So I alone voted for adding civil rights protections to the code without a vote of the people. The rest of the council chose to put the question to the voters, and it was defeated. Now it seems that people's attitudes have shifted, but 20 years has passed. It was a very difficult time for myself and my family. I have a wonderful family that I'm enormously proud of. I'm a sort of vanilla American family, a husband and 2 children. But my own children were subjected to unnecessary harassment by adults about my position on gay rights. And looking back, it was strengthening for them, but they were young, 13 and 11, very challenging times for children. So looking back, I have to say that that discussion was the most challenging time for me as mayor. And I know in hindsight I could have done things better in terms of public process, but my own position I'm very proud of. You know, I was lucky to be the mayor during the time that we welcomed Tom Sutherland home from 6 years of captivity in Beirut, Lebanon. He was a community member who had been serving as a dean at the American University in Beirut, Lebanon, and had been seized as a hostage. And his captivity was well known throughout the community, and he was released during the time I was mayor. My fondest memory of my time as mayor was welcoming him home and being so impressed by his ability to forgive people who had held him in captivity. Rather than be angry and bitter, he and his family were as generous and understanding of the world that they had been part of as I've ever seen. And his behavior and my part in that, my family's part in that, is my fondest memory of being mayor of Fort Collins. I was the last council-selected mayor and the first directly elected mayor. So I had 1 year where the council members ourselves selected leadership. I became the mayor on a 4-3 vote and voted for myself. So you can tell that it was really a strong mandate that I be mayor. There were lots of internal politics for deciding who was going to be the mayor when the council selected its own mayor. We also had a system of revolving door mayors, so you were mayor for a year and then someone else was selected as mayor. So we didn't have consistent leadership except with the city manager. So I worked hard to try to change the system. My training is as a political scientist, so I had been interested in leadership for a growing city and what that looked like. I didn't necessarily put myself in that role, but as it turned out, I was. I stood on street corners, passed petitions, worked with my council to put the question to the voters because it was a charter change. It had to go to the voters. And the voters approved a directly elected mayor, and I served in that capacity for 2 years. Now, I think it's a strength for Fort Collins to have the leadership of the community selected by a direct vote of the people. It's made a different dynamic out of the mayor's race. I'm also pleased because Fort Collins has not become a city where the mayor's race is an expensive venture. We're still, I would guess that we're among the largest cities with the cheapest price of running for mayor. And that's, I think, because of our lack of network TV. But in any case, we have a directly elected mayor, and we have had a succession now of mayors who've served more than 2 years. I served only 2 years in that role and then did not run for re-election. So I think that all things considered, that my greatest contribution to the community's future at that time was working toward a directly elected mayor. I think future generations of leaders would be wise to recognize the importance of friends and family. It's an experience like no other to serve in leadership where there are more than 200 people involved, because the diversity of opinion is sure to mean that over time you've disappointed most everyone. So if you have the support of family and friends, you know that at least someone loves you, and you don't look for love and reinforcement in all of the voices that are clamoring for your support. As long as you have a set of principles and the love of your family and friends, I think leadership comes in all shapes and sizes, and I would hope that our future generation of leaders has good support at home and a solid foundation of principles, and then moves forward to make decisions on behalf of others with those in mind. Within a 25-year time horizon, I see Fort Collins having increasingly interesting transportation options. The Mason Corridor is just one example of the kind of innovative transportation that I suspect we're going to be among the early adopters. I think that the presence of Colorado State University and its spin-offs and some of the other tech spin-offs and our practical citizens will mean that in transportation options we are right up there with leadership. So in 25 years I expect to see interesting transportation options. I also expect that we'll see higher density along our transportation corridors because I think that we're going to see more people who value the ability to get around other than single occupancy vehicles. So I think that's really exciting. 100 years for me is scary because, I have a 1-year-old grandchild, and with some of the information that's coming out about medical care and health opportunities, people might live to be 100 years old. But I'm worried about climate change and its impact on our region for water. I'm worried about food security because of climate change. And I'm worried about our economic well-being for those reasons, plus tourism, which is a big piece of our economic engine, making this area less attractive. So 100 years from now, I'm worried, to be honest, and I intend to do what I can for the rest of my lifetime to bend the trend with respect to climate change, and hope that our leadership in the future, both locally, at the state level and globally, can get a grip on some of the challenges of climate change so that we will have a future in 100 years.